Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. Today I am very excited to be doing a review of one of my favorite books of all time, and that is The Gunslinger by Stephen King, the very first entry into his Dark Tower series. So the Gunslinger is a bit of a divisive book in the fantasy world in terms of people both within the fandom, so the constant readers, and without the fandom, so people who don't really know if they want to give the Dark Tower a try. One thing that I have always found really interesting about Stephen King's Dark Tower series, and what you'll see if you spend a lot of time either on Discord or in discussions with other people who really love these books, is that there's no really clear ranking. So for some book series, you'll find that there are books that always kind of make the top of people's lists and books that always make the bottom. And while there is one book in particular in this series that is nearly always everyone's least favorite, I find that people's top 3 or 4 Dark Tower books are variable. There's a lot of diversity in terms of what people enjoy. And it seems to be split down the middle between whether or not people really enjoy The Gunslinger. I will say that a lot of people recommend, or a lot of people say that once they finish the series, when they go back and reread The Gunslinger, they find that to be a very rewarding experience. They find that the book is so much richer, that there are so many references or allusions that they can pick up on and that they understand, and that it enriches the experience entirely of having read the whole series. I agree with that sentiment. I think that this is a book that was made for rereading. And I have actually reread it more times than I have reread any of the other books in the series. I'm not sure if this is my favorite. My favorite Dark Tower book changes all the time, depending on the mood that I'm in or what I'm rereading. But it is a book that I have always loved. I loved this the first time that I read it, and I have loved it on every reread since. I think that in terms of setting up such an epic and monumental fantasy series, The Gunslinger does a really good job of setting the stage for certain things that we will come to expect on our road to the Dark Tower. Things like the tone of the series, the atmosphere of the series, the gritty characters, the strange occurrences, the bizarre gallimaufry of genres that are just blended together into a jumble that somehow really works for this series. I think that reading this book is such a unique experience in terms of fantasy novels, especially if you're used to reading those classic fantasy tropes. What Stephen King has done and what he has taken in The Gunslinger and what he has created, I think, is something that has never been replicated in fantasy since this book was written or since this series was finished. I do want to talk about some of the elements of the book and what I feel makes this so special and why I feel that you should read it. But before I talk a little bit about that, I just want to read the opening paragraph of this book so that you can get a feeling for what I mean when I talk about atmosphere. So a lot of people know the opening line to The Gunslinger. It's quite a famous opening line, but I'm going to continue a little bit further and just give you a sense of how the novel opens up. The man in black fled across the desert, and the gunslinger followed. The desert was the apotheosis of all deserts, huge, standing to the sky for what looked like eternity in all directions. It was white and blinding and waterless, and without features save for the faint, cloudy haze of the mountains, which sketched themselves on the horizon, and the devil grass which brought sweet dreams, nightmares, death. An occasional tombstone sign pointed the way, for once the drifted track that cut its way through the thick crust of alkali had been a highway. Coaches and buckas had followed it. The world had moved on since then. The world had emptied. So in that short paragraph, we're given such a rich imagining of the world that we've been placed in. So in The Gunslinger, we follow Roland Deschain, who is a gunslinger and known as the last of his kind. Kind of in the spirit of Arthur and his Knights of the Round Table, Roland Deschain is a descendant from a king named Arthur Eld, and he's part of an elite warrior caste who have been trained since birth to go out and defend the land, to defend the weak, and to serve the beams, or to serve the tower. So Roland is on what is ultimately his holy grail quest, his quest for the Dark Tower. And as we read through this novel, we get a look into, we get a look into the obsessive nature of this quest. We find out just how rabidly Roland is following this path, how determined he is to find this tower. And as we work our way through the story, we find that there is nothing, not love, not friendship, not loyalty, there is no force that is strong enough to move Roland from his path. He is single-minded in his pursuit of this goal. And what I think Stephen King establishes really early in this story from that description is this gritty, bleak atmosphere. The world that Roland exists in has moved on, in Stephen King's words. And moving on, or the world moving on, is a huge theme in these novels. As you make your way through The Gunslinger and through the entirety of The Dark Tower, you begin to get a sense that the world in which Roland lives is maybe a mirror, maybe another version, maybe in fact it is our world. We get the sensation that time means very little. Time is crumbling apart. And King does this really well, and he establishes this fact really well by not really letting us know how old Roland is, how long he's been on this quest. We get some flashbacks interwoven throughout the novel about his childhood, about his upbringing and his training, and we get the sense that he did not start this quest alone. We hear about friends, we hear about people that were very important to him, but we don't get a very solid timeline on when these things happened or how these events played out. And I really think that that adds to the richness of this atmosphere. We start off in this dry, boneless, dusty desert that puts in your mind the sensation of thirst, of not being able to be satisfied. And that is a really good mirror and a really good parallel to Roland's thirst to find this tower. He is on a quest that has beaten him down, that has stripped him of everyone that he loves, and he still, with this kind of dogged single-mindedness, is pursuing this goal. And I think that Stephen King's language and the way that he builds up this setting really lends to that sensation, or it really helps you understand the emotional and psychological state of Roland at the beginning of this quest. Stephen King has talked at great length about his inspirations for The Dark Tower, and two main inspirations that I feel like you need to talk about when you're reviewing this book are Robert Browning's poem, Child Roland to the Dark Tower Came, which is a very short poem and very worthwhile. I think if you have already taken your journey to the tower, or if you would like to start on your journey to the tower, then reading this poem, listening to this poem narrated, gives you a sense of that bleakness, that gritty atmosphere that Stephen King was going for. And one of his other major influences, outside of Tolkien and kind of the hero's quest story that he wanted to put his own unique spin on, is the good, the bad, and the ugly. So the Western that in the introduction of the version of this book that I currently own, he talks about seeing that on the big screen for the first time. And if you have ever seen that movie, I think that there are a lot of interesting parallels between how that movie opens and how The Gunslinger opens. In the film, in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, there's this sense of tension that permeates like the first 5 minutes of the movie. If you even have time to just watch those first 5 minutes, no matter how many times you've seen it, you get this sense of foreboding, this sense that something bad is going to happen. And I think that you get that same sensation when you start reading The Dark Tower. If you are a fan of spaghetti westerns, if you're a fan of the western genre, then I think you will find a lot to like in The Gunslinger in particular. I talked about a little bit earlier how The Dark Tower is kind of an amalgamation of a bunch of different genres. And in The Gunslinger, we see the most obvious Western influences. Now, Roland is a gunslinger. He wields guns. He has a specific manner of speaking and a specific code of honor that very much hails back to the things that we love about those Westerns. But it is definitely at its height in The Gunslinger. We also get a mixture of high fantasy. We get that hero's journey and the hero's quest. There are elements of science fiction with this degrading of the world and strange occurrences where technology or failing technology will become a part of the landscape, will have an impact on the story. There are certainly horror elements and elements of the bizarre, which this is a Stephen King novel. You should come to expect these things, but there are some pretty gruesome details and some pretty gruesome elements in this story. This is not at all for the light of heart. And then we also get, I think, a flair of literary fiction where we explore some of the deeper philosophical questions of the universe, about the nature of the quest, about the nature of humanity. And we see a lot of that kind of at the back end of the novel. But I think if you enjoy any of those genres, if you want to read a fantasy book that is truly something unique, something that you have not experienced, then I think that giving The Gunslinger a try and giving The Dark Tower a try is a fantastic idea. I want to touch a little bit on the difficulty that some people seem to have with The Dark Tower. Now, this is a very short novel. It's only about 300 pages in length, but a lot of people seem to struggle with it. They don't enjoy the style, they find it boring, they have a difficult time empathizing with the main character. And while I don't share that perspective, I can understand where that comes from. To explain the structure of the novel a little bit, this is a novel that's made of 5 short stories that have been gathered together. So I believe these were published between like 1978 and 1982, and then they were bound together and sold as a novel in 1982. And so there is a bit of a distinct story within each of these 5 parts, but I think that they do form together quite well to present an entire narrative and to give us a good idea of who the character of Roland is. In terms of tone, I think that the novels themselves, so The Dark Tower is a bleak story. This had that kind of grittiness, that grimness, before grimdark became such a mainstream term in fantasy. We have a hero who very much is gray in his morality. He, as I mentioned before, is single-minded in his pursuit of the Dark Tower. He cares about it above all other things. We do get to see over the course of the novel the things that can impact the gunslinger, that he does have emotions, that things can resonate with him, but he's not an easy character to like. I really do like Roland, but it's not a simple, he's a hero and I really enjoy his character. I think he's a very complex character. I think that he is fascinating and I really enjoy watching him evolve over the course of the series, but I don't know that he's a character with whom you're going to feel an immediate kinship or for whom you're going to feel immediate admiration. He definitely requires some time to grow on you, and that can be a bit of a hurdle for people in this first novel. As for the plot, this is, as I said, it's very episodic. It takes place in 5 parts, and those 5 parts of the novel focus on a different part of Roland's journey across the desert in pursuit of this man in black. Some people may find this a little bit disjointed, but again, I think because of the atmosphere, because of the nature of Roland's quest, I think that this kind of jumping episodic nature just lends to the overall atmosphere of mystery of the novel, and I really like it. However, I do think that if you come to the end of this book, which I said, once again, is only 300 pages, if you don't feel an immediate investment or an immediate connection to the rest of the series, or that compulsion to go on, like you need to find out what happens next, I would give the next novel in the series a try. The second book, The Drawing of the Three, is much more plot oriented. There's a lot more action that's happening, and it will give you a good sense of where the rest of the story is going to go. In the second novel, we get introduced to some of the key players in the quest for the Dark Tower, and we're not just focused on Roland and kind of his grim outlook on life. There are some characters who add a little bit of levity. There's some humor that comes in. And I think before you decide that the Dark Tower is not for you, you should very much go on to book 2. Book 1, I think, is a fantastic entry point. I think that it sets up what you should expect in terms of atmosphere and theme and tone, but it might not give you that kind of sense of adventure that I do think permeates the rest of the Dark Tower novels. So I would really urge you to read books 1 and 2 together in order to decide if you're going to go on. Overall, I find it really difficult to give an unbiased assessment of this book. As I've said, this is one of my favorite books of all time. Every time that I reread it, I enjoy it so much. I love Roland. I love his story. I really enjoy the way that this book comes together, the way that the various stories slot into each other. And I think that there is so much that is totally unique in this book, and a lot of what I would love to talk about has spoilers, so I won't cover it in this video, but I am hoping to come back and do some spoiler talk about the first book or about the first couple of books in the series. So hopefully there will be some people who are constant readers, who are followers of the Beam, who would like to come back and see that. But what I would like to impress upon you, if you have not given the Dark Tower a chance, or if you have been worried because you feel like it might be too bizarre, or there's so much that you've heard about the way that the series ends, or you think that there might be horror elements that you can't handle, I really encourage everybody to read this. I think that Stephen King created something with the Dark Tower series that has not, and probably will not, ever be replicated. He, for better or for worse, pushes the boundaries of what you can do in fantasy, and for me, that created one of my favorite fantasy series of all time. But even if this is not your typical fantasy fare, I think that this is an unmissable part of the fantasy canon, and I would highly recommend anybody to pick it up. If you do and you like it or dislike it, then please let me know. If you are constant readers, or if you have read and enjoyed the Dark Tower, then please let me know in the comments below. I'd love to know what your favorite Dark Tower book is. I'd love to know your thoughts on the Gunslinger and what you felt about this book in particular. And I will see you with another video soon. Bye!